Hey, Mason. Hey, Mason, how you doing? Greetings.
Hello.
How's it going?
Going good.
Good. Mason was on a minute ago, and I think he went away.
Oh.
Yeah, kind of weird.
I'm sorry I had to leave the meeting early last week. I meant to mention that to you, but I didn't get to. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Just remember that it's on my YouTube channel.
Yes, yeah.
Cool.
I watched I like that podcast.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, Peter Adamson is great. And yeah, so I guess you saw the announcement that I put up.
Yeah, I got your email, yeah. So I got the URL that way.
Sweet.
Yeah, I watched the first two or I watched the podcast on I always want to say Thales. What's the name?
Thales.
Thales, yeah, Thales, and then some of the some of his predecessors or some other pre-Socratics. I have trouble with their names. There's three of them, and they're all kind of and so the whole elemental concept. Or there's various elemental concepts. I guess with water, with Thales, and then some of the other ones. Air, and sort of being breath. And
is Anaxagoras air? I think maybe.
Anaxagoras, yes.
Yeah. Hi, Mirka. I have a weird feeling about this class, almost like this is the wrong Zoom link or something. I don't know. Hey, Max. Charles. Y'all, greetings. It's good to see everyone. So I don't know if y'all know what Ash Wednesday is. It's kind of the first day of Lent, and we had a snowpocalypse last week, and so my church we sort of did a makeup Ash Wednesday service today, hence my beautiful ashes. But it's good to see you guys. Can everyone hear me at the moment?
Yes.
Great. Okay. We will go ahead and get started. I want to begin with a couple of housekeeping things. First off, if you look at the reading schedule, can y'all see my desktop at the moment?
Yes.
Great. If you look at the reading schedule, we're a little behind, but that's okay. What I want to say is that if you look here, so right now it's February 24. So we're supposed to do the discarded image, C.S. Lewis discarded image this week. We'll do that next week. And you can see how I have 2 weeks scheduled for Pieper, Guide to Thomas Aquinas. We'll probably reduce that down to 1 week. And so we should be fine. Okay. But I wanted to say that. The other thing I wanted to say is that did I not say that this coming Monday, I'll take a few minutes and talk about the paper? Did I say that?
Yes.
Very good. So I will do that on Monday. We'll take like 15 to 20 minutes and just talk about the paper, make sure everyone is on the same page with that. Okay. Yeah, those are a couple of housekeeping things. And y'all, we are making our way through Augustine's Confessions. And yeah, I really enjoyed the last class. I sort of was planning on launching into book 11, sorry, today, but actually I think that I'm going to go ahead and we're going to continue in book 7. If we finish book 7, then we can make our way to book 11 if we have time at the end of this class. But I think what I want to do is go over book 7 again. You will remember that I sort of put 2 outlines on Canvas. One of them was a super simple outline, and that's what we went over last class. But I want to go a little deeper into book 7. It's an amazing text, probably one of the most important texts that you will ever read. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to do today. Okay. Let me hit the pause button before I begin. I'm just going to go through these notes on book 7 that you guys have on Canvas. But before I start with that, does anyone have any questions or comments? Anything, any burning desire to speak? Y'all might see that that I put an announcement up just sort of in response to Michael. Michael had some really interesting things to say. You all did, but Michael did in particular. And so I was thinking about those the other day, and I wrote an announcement for you. And in that announcement, I recommended a podcast, which is by a guy named Peter Adamson. He's the one who wrote the little text that y'all read on, I think, Parmenides. No, it may have been Heraclitus. I actually can't remember. One of those two. But it's a great podcast, and it should help with some of the stuff that we're going over in this class, especially if you listen to the episode on Thales, which I mentioned. And then also, I would just recommend the Atomists. I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Any thoughts, questions before we delve into book 7 and these notes on book 7 of the Confessions? Any burning desire to speak? Okay. Let's go through these notes and this outline. I need to grab my book if you can hang on real quick. All right. So one of the things I'm hoping we can do today is actually crack open the book and read a few lines from it. But look with me at these notes. At the very beginning of the book, section 1:1, Augustine says that he was unable. Okay, let me back up real quick and give a little bit of context. So last class we went over things at a fairly broad level, which was fine. But what's going on in this book? I mean, would anyone like to tell me what's going on in this book, in book 7 of the Confessions? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? In a way, the entire book of the Confessions is a narration of Augustine's autobiography, right? Especially books 1 through 9. And earlier in the book, he had described a scene. This isn't a part that we did not read, actually, in which he had a conversion experience. He hears a voice. He thinks it's the voice of St. Paul saying, take up and read. And he goes into that. That's earlier in the book. It's kind of like a foreshadowing of what's later to come. What we have in book 7 is really a narrative of his conversion from a more intellectual experience, from a more intellectual perspective. And so really, he's talking about the books of the Platonists and how they sort of prepared him to embrace what he calls the Catholic faith. That phrase, the Catholic faith, is in the book. I don't know if I can remember exactly where that is, but those are his words. He is saying that the books of the Neoplatonists prepared him. They disabused him of certain illusions that he was suffering under, and prepared him to be able to embrace the Catholic faith. Okay, y'all don't get hung up on that phrase, the Catholic faith. One way that you could think about that would be just Christian orthodoxy, or just sort of like the contents of Christianity, right? Jesus Christ as God and man, the nation of Israel as God's people in the old covenant, which becomes the church, or shifts to the church in a way in the New Testament / New Covenant. Also the doctrine of the Trinity and things like that. This is what he means by the Catholic faith, okay? And so book 7 is a narrative of his conversion away from these illusions, and for now we could call those illusions Manichaeism. Last class, I identified 2 errors. He identifies 2 errors of Manichaeanism. Can someone remind me what those 2 errors were? What are the 2 errors of Manichaeism that he says that the Neoplatonists disabused him of? Any thoughts on that? One of them was the idea that God is spatially extended. Kind of interesting, right? I mean, we camped out on Parmenides and Heraclitus, and you can really see why. I mean, the issues of Parmenides and Heraclitus pop up in book 7 in a big way. He literally says that he had been thinking of God as if God was spatially extended. Now, he didn't think that God had an arm and a big toe and a nose, but he says that he thought that God was spread out through the entire cosmos in infinitely in every direction. That's one of the 2 errors that the Manichees held, and that he held, that he was then disabused of by the Neoplatonists. The second one is this idea that God is not ultimate, but actually there's some other creature who's sort of on par with God. And that has a lot to do with the way that Augustine thinks about evil, okay? But we'll come to that in a moment. That's a little bit of context in terms of what's going on in book 7. Look with me here at 1:1. Augustine says that he was unable to conceive of any substance other than what the eyes normally perceive, okay? And you can see that that's connected to his belief that God was extended spatially. Yes, he thought that God was infinite in every direction, but that's still very much along the same lines as the sort of things that we see with our eyes. You know what I mean? The other thing that I would say about this is that, remember how we spent so much time talking about Heraclitus? Well, one of the things that we are reminded of here in this statement that Augustine was unable to conceive of any substance other than what the eyes normally perceive. One of the things that this reminds us of is that what Heraclitus is talking about in terms of the blooming, buzzing confusion, this idea that all is flux, that is also the world of sense perception. What Heraclitus is talking about is everything that we see and hear and smell and taste and touch. In case you haven't noticed thus far, sense perception is a huge, huge issue in the history of philosophy. And so Augustine is saying that when he was laboring under the errors of the Manichaeans, he was conceiving of God in the same way that he conceived of ordinary objects in the world, aka stuff that the eyes can see. Okay. And y'all, if you have any comments or questions, at any point through this, please don't hesitate. Look with me at right here. Note that in 3:4, he implies that God created the soul. I'm going to read that because I think with Mirka and also with Christian, there was this little debate about reincarnation, aka the transmigration of the soul. I was trying to say that there's no way Augustine believes in reincarnation, because he believes that souls are created by God. Now, is it technically possible to believe both of those two things at the same time? Maybe, but it never happens practically. Practically speaking, everyone in the history of philosophy who has believed in the transmigration of the soul also thinks that the soul is what? Can someone tell me? Also thinks that the soul is immortal. Okay, transmigration of the soul / reincarnation goes along with the immortality of the soul. So if Augustine denies the immortality of the soul, he does not believe in reincarnation / transmigration of the soul. Okay, and I think that in 3:4, he implies that God created the soul. So let's look at that. 3:4. I'm just going to read a little bit. But a problem remained to trouble me. This is on Chadwick, page 113. A problem remained to trouble me, although I affirmed and firmly held divine immunity from pollution and change, and the complete immutability of our God. So far, he agrees with the Catholic faith, right? He agrees with Orthodox Christianity. He agrees with Aristotle and Parmenides in terms of God's simplicity, because he's saying, yes, I did believe that God was immutable. What does immutable mean? Who can tell me what immutable means? What does the word mutate mean?
Immutable means not changing.
That's right. So what he's doing here at 3:4 is confessing that he did hold to the doctrine of that God does not change, right? So what I'm saying to you is that he's on the right track there. His views there line up with Orthodox Christianity and what we've been seeing in this class so far, right? Now, up here, I said that Augustine was a semi-Manichaeanism. This is an example of that. So what he's doing in 3:4 is he's saying, hey, I did not believe that God changes. So in that sense, he is not Manichae, and he is of the Catholic faith. But he was still confused in some other ways, right? Okay, back to my main point. Here in 3:4, what I'm trying to say is that he says or implies that he thinks that God created the soul. So I'm going to keep reading. Although I affirmed and firmly held divine immunity from pollution and change and the complete immutability of our God, the true God who made not only our souls, but also our bodies. Right? So what do we have right there? He's saying that God made the soul. therefore there's no way he believes in the immortality of the soul. And therefore what I'm saying is he doesn't believe in reincarnation / the transmigration of the soul. Okay. Now it is weird because I claim that he does think that we have this mysterious memory of being at one with God. Yeah, I do claim that he has that view. So he has to come up with some other way to account for that other than the immortality of the soul, other than reincarnation. That would be a good paper topic, I suppose. I don't have time to rehearse the bidding on that right now. But I just wanted to point out that he does here say that God made the soul. Okay, that means he does not believe in the immortality of the soul. And that also means 99.9% that he doesn't believe in reincarnation / the transmigration of the soul. Okay. Now, y'all, that's just a few little random tidbits almost that he talks about at the opening of the book. What I want to do now is really, and this is so interesting, I think, so important. This right here is the kind of thing that makes me super glad that I'm teaching this class, that I get to discuss this stuff with you guys. But see, Augustine talks about an experience, right? I tried to stress this last class. It's one thing to think about something in a theoretical, abstract way, like maybe, I don't know, thinking about how to solve a homework problem in your organic chemistry class. That's one thing. But it's something else entirely to experience something, right? Another way to think about it might be, it's one thing for me to think about my wife, to think about her dress size, to think about her favorite flavor of ice cream, to think about the sorts of things that she likes for me to do, like take out the trash, blah, blah, blah. It's one thing to think about my wife, but it's something else for me to experience my wife, right? To experience my wife, whether that's in terms of a conversation or some other way. These are two very different things, right? Experiencing or thinking about things abstractly on the one hand and experiencing them on the other. Are you with me so far? Now, what Augustine has that we're about to see, what he narrates in book 7, is an experience of something. Now, I want to hit the pause button real quick before we sort of delve into it. I want to try to make a connection with Plato's line. Can someone remind me of the 4 segments of Plato's line? What's the bottom segment, the first one? It's images, right? Or akasia in Greek. What's the second one?
Faith.
That's right, faith, Mirka, very good. And the Greek word there is the word pistis. In Latin, it's fides. Is it fides? I think it's probably fides, F-I-D-E-S, fides. Yeah, faith. Or you could also think about it in terms of trust, right, Mirka? I tried to emphasize that as we were going over Plato's line. It's this idea that we have to trust. I have to trust not only that my chair, the chair that I'm sitting in, I have to trust. It's not enough for me to perceive it as an image sort of in my mind. I have to sit in order for the chair to actually be worth something, I need to have confidence that it will hold me up. And something similar is true for every object in the world. I mean, you might think that, or you might wonder if maybe this cup is an illusion because you see the image, right? And even in dreams, we see images. It's one thing to see an image like in a dream. It's another thing to actually have confidence that it's real, right? So that's akasia and trust or confidence. Those two things go together to create a situation in which we have an assurance that the things in the world are real. They're not just images. They're not just illusions. They're real. They're real things. Now, what's the third segment?
Discursivity.
Yes, discursivity. I'm going to write that in the chat if I can find the chat. Very good, Mirka. You're on fire. Discursivity. Discursivity. Or you... Man, I hate spell check. Discursivity. Discursivity, or you might say discursiveness or discursive thinking. Can y'all see that? Discursivity, discursiveness, or discursive thinking. Some people might call it abstract thinking, but I think you know what it is. And I think you know what I mean. And the Greek word is dianoia, which means through. The dia prefix means through. So the idea is that the mind, the nous, noia, nous, dia, noia, nous is the mind. The idea is that the mind is moving through objects, entities, elements like the words on the page, right? In order to read a paragraph of Augustine, your mind has to focus on the first word, then the second word, then the third word, even the first letter of the word, right? There's all these elements, letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, etc. Your mind moves through those, puts them together, takes them apart. But then, y'all, what is the fourth moment of Plato's line?
Intellect.
Intellect, yes. And Mirka, I'm glad that you said that. Intellect is an English word. It comes from the Latin intellectus or intellectus, and the Greek is nous, which means mind, okay? Mind. Intellect means mind. When we get to C.S. Lewis, he's going to talk a lot about intellect versus reason. By the way, reason is dianoia. Reason is that third segment. Intellect is the final one. But y'all, let's bring it back to Augustine, because what I want to do real quick is to connect Plato's line to what Augustine's talking about. Because remember how I said there's a difference between abstract thought on the one hand and experiencing something on the other? Abstract thought is dianoia. Are you with me? It's that third segment on Plato's line, the discursive thinking, making distinctions, putting things together, taking them apart, going through a list of elements, step 1, step 2, step 3, conclusion. That's dianoia, and that's abstract thinking. That's discursivity. That's the third segment of Plato's line. But here in the Confessions that we're about to see, he's talking about an experience. Not abstract thought, but an experience. Now, what I want to suggest to you is that the experience that he has is related to nous. It's related to the third segment on the line. It might not be identical to it, but put it to you like this. Have you ever had an epiphany or an aha experience? We might have talked about this a little bit in the last class. That's kind of what is going on with nous, the fourth segment of Plato's line. In Plato's line, you grasp the whole. You're like, oh my God, I now get the whole thing. Have you ever seen a movie, like a super complicated movie? I recently saw the movie Tenet by Christopher Nolan. Oh my God, that movie's crazy. Very good. Very complicated. Honestly, I don't even think I understand it. But let's say that I watch it again and I go through the movie again and I get to the end and I'm like, oh, I get it now. That's an epiphany. That's the final segment on Plato's line. That's whenever you grasp the whole, W-H-O-L-E. Are you with me? What I'm trying to say to you right now is that that is closely related to an experience. An epiphany is kind of like an experience. Now, I don't want to reduce what Augustine is describing here to a mere epiphany, because I think that he's talking about something greater than that. He's talking about some kind of mystical experience in which he thinks that he sees God, or becomes one with God. You might call it nirvana, you might call it enlightenment. He's talking about some kind of transformational experience which changes everything for him, right? It's an experience. It's not merely abstract theoretical thinking. And I'm saying that it's related to nous. It's related to intellect. It's related to grasping the whole. And it's kind of like, let me put it like this. It's an epiphany on steroids. It's an epiphany that's much, 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 much greater than an epiphany. Put it like this. It's an epiphany, not just that you grasp with your mind, but that you feel with your body and your heart. It's an epiphany that changes, that transforms you. And it's a holistic epiphany that where the scales of your eyes fall off and you suddenly are fully alive. I feel like I'm not doing a good job of talking about this. Let's delve in and see what he says, okay? Look with me at this part of my notes here. So it's in 913 that he introduces the notion of the books of the Platonists. So for example, so that, like, I don't know, if you're writing a paper on the Confessions, or maybe if you ever come back to the Confessions, mark that section 913, because that's where he introduces the books of the Platonists, right? And as we talked about already, he has in mind Plotinus, but also Plotinus as mediated by Porphyry. Porphyry was Plotinus's disciple who basically like edited his writings and put them all together in a book. But as he did that, he also sort of snuck in some of his own ideas. That's Plotinus and Porphyry. That's who Augustine means by the Platonists, okay? Now, there's a very interesting section over multiple sections where Augustine talks about he basically says blah 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 blah. The books of the Platonists did talk about that, but they didn't talk about this. They did talk about this, but they didn't talk about this. And whenever I talk about how Christianity is a fusion or a synthesis or a dialectic between Greek thought and Hebrew thought, Greek thought and Jewish thought, that's what's going on in those sections. Sadly, I did not write down where those were. I wonder if anyone can help me find those. They're after 915. Okay, I'm getting close. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't write that down. There's several paragraphs where he does that. If I find them, I will tell them to you, okay? But for now, let's keep moving down. I do actually want to read some stuff. In fact, okay, look, we already talked about the plundering of the Egyptians last time. I hope that you remember that that is an allusion from the book of Exodus, basically. And Augustine thinks that he's stealing stuff from the Greeks and co-opting them in service of God and the truth and Christianity, okay? That's what he thinks. And you can see the reference there. Y'all, before we move to the next bullet point, though, I think what I want to do is read a little bit. And I want to read right here where he does first mentioned the books of the Platonists at 913. Actually, it's where I'm at is 1016. Sorry, 1016. I want to read a little bit in 1016, okay? By the Platonic books, I was admonished to return to myself. That's pretty interesting. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. Down here, I talk about Augustine's inward turn. And I think that in the last class, I talked about how Augustine is kind of like an existentialist. So that's relevant here when he says, I was admonished to return to myself. There's a kind of reflexivity here. Augustine, remember how one of the names for Aristotle's God is thought thinking itself? And I tried to emphasize that that is a reflexive relationship. What is a reflexive relationship? It's a relationship in which the subject, like I, Matt, and the object, cup, Matt sees the cup. A reflexive relationship is whenever the subject, that's me, and the object, that's the cup, are in this relationship with each other, so that I'm affecting the cup, but the cup is also affecting me. If there's anyone who speaks Spanish and I were to say something like, esta noche me voy a bañar. Tonight I'm gonna take a shower. That's reflexive because I'm doing something to myself. So I am both the subject and the object. Does that make sense? That's reflexivity. And when Augustine here in 1016 says that he was admonished to return to himself, there's a kind of reflexivity going on there. He's not thinking simply about objects out in the world. He's coming back to himself. And I think that already right here, you can, you start to get chills down your spine and you begin to realize, oh my gosh, he's having some sort of mystical experience. This isn't just boring, abstract, systematic philosophy, okay? With you as my guide, I entered into my innermost citadel. So again, he's going inside of himself, okay? And was given power to do so because you had become my helper. I entered and with my soul's eye, such as it was, saw above that same eye of my soul, the immutable light higher than my mind. That's amazing. So first off, Augustine's talking about light. We've talked about light a little bit in this class. By the way, let me ask you, if you think about Plato's line, we've talked about the 4 segments, 1, 2, 3, 4. Does anyone remember what was above the line? What was transcendent to the line?
Wasn't it the sun or something like that?
It was the sun. And so the sun is connected to light, right? Listen to his language here. I entered in with my mind's eye, my soul's eye. I saw above the same eye of my soul, the immutable light that was higher than my mind. That's structurally identical to Plato's line, is it not? Because he's talking about his mind, that's nous, even though he's writing in Latin and he uses the word intellect, intellectus. What's right above mind? Light. And the light is immutable, right? That is because this light is divine. And the light is higher than his mind. There's so much I could say, but I want to keep reading. Not the light of every day, okay? So he's talking about light here, but this is not visual light. This is not light that his eyes can perceive. This is intellectual light. This is some sort of spiritual light. What is that? Well, it's hard to describe. You might call it, I think one way to begin to wrap your mind about it is you can talk about the intellectual light of reason. So for example, things like the law of non-contradiction. You can think of that as a kind of light, a kind of intellectual light. Y'all, let me hit the pause button and let me say this. Think about language, right? So much of philosophy is thinking about language and the way that we use words. Have you ever heard anyone say something like, do you see what I'm saying? Or do you see what I mean? Have you ever heard that? If I'm explaining something to you, or maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend is explaining something to you, and then they're like, do you see what I mean? Are they talking about seeing with your eyes? Yes or no?
No.
They're not. And all throughout the history of philosophy, from the very, very beginning, it's interesting that people have talked about reason and the life of the mind with visual vocabulary. Visual vocabulary. It's a huge theme from the beginning right up to today. And that's relevant here, right? Because Augustine's not talking about his physical eyes, and therefore he's not talking about ordinary light, although I'm not even sure that light is ordinary, right? Because post-Newtonian physics, quantum mechanics tells us that it's both a light and a particle. That's crazy. There's something very mysterious even about ordinary light. But Augustine's not talking about ordinary light. He's talking about intellectual light here, okay? And he says, not the light of every day, obvious to anyone, nor a larger version of the same kind, which would, as it were, have given out a much brighter light and filled everything with its magnitude. So the kind of light he's talking about is not greater than ordinary light simply by degree. It's different in kind. It was not that light, Augustine says, but a different thing, utterly different from all our kinds of light. It transcended my mind. So earlier, when I talked about the law of non-contradiction as a kind of light, that's kind of like training wheels. Like, in other words, that's a rudimentary form of what he's talking about. If you want to know what Augustine's talking about by this kind of light that transcends his mind, if I want to know what he's talking about, a good way to start is by thinking about the law of non-contradiction. Remember earlier, I was talking about how Augustine's experience is like an epiphany on steroids. This kind of light is like the law of non-contradiction, but on steroids, okay? This light, he said, is above his mind. It transcended my mind. I hope that y'all are with me on the text. Y'all, it's so important to read this stuff. Philosophy, look, okay, there's that scene in The Matrix. Some of you were born after The Matrix came out in 2000, I think, maybe all of you. But many of you have probably seen it. There's a scene in The Matrix where Neo gets jujitsu lessons downloaded into his brain. Do you realize that assumes that knowing how to do jujitsu is just information? It's ones and zeros. Reading philosophy is not ones and zeros. Reading philosophy, doing philosophy, learning how to think, and knowing why the hell it matters in the first place involves reading the texts. I mean, it's not easy, but there's no substitute to actually wading through these lines that Augustine has written and grappling with them. And he says, it transcended my mind, not in the way that oil floats on water. Notice that he keeps throwing out negations. He says, I experienced this light, but it wasn't like this, and it wasn't like that, and it wasn't like this. Those are negations, aren't they? Does that sound familiar? Where else have we seen negations? Where else?
Isn't that Parmenidean being?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the doctrine of simplicity. God is not this, God is not that, God is not this, not same thing that he's doing here. It's almost like he's saying that this light is God. Might he be saying that? He might. That's a great question that's probably unanswerable. I'm not going to say that he doesn't think this light is God. This light is so mysterious that it's as if it's God or something like that. Let's keep reading. It transcended my mind, not in the way that oil floats on water, nor as heaven is above earth. It was superior because it made me. Now it sounds like the light is God, doesn't it? That almost seems idolatrous, does it not? I mean, I thought that God was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or Jesus. Is Augustine saying that there's 4 persons in the Trinity? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and light? No, he's not saying that. What is he saying? I'm not quite sure. I don't think anyone's quite sure. I don't think he's quite sure. These are not simple, like, ones and zeros of information that are clear. But this light that he experiences, by the way, is it possible to experience something that you don't fully understand? Have you ever fallen in love? Have you ever experienced trauma? Interesting that I'm talking about falling in love and trauma in the same breath. Maybe those two things are very similar. Maybe falling in love is a kind of trauma. But if you've ever experienced trauma, maybe only years later were you able to look back on it and be like, oh, I get something about that now, right? At first, you don't get it. It's possible to experience things that you don't understand. And I think that that's partly what's going on here with Augustine. He has had this experience and language fails. Like, language is not adequate to scientifically capture what happened. But he says that it was light. And the light was superior to me because it made me. And I was inferior because I was made by it. The person who knows the truth knows it. The person who knows the truth knows this light, Augustine says. Eternal truth and true love and beloved eternity, you are my God. Oh, I skipped a very important phrase. Do you see what I skipped? Probably the most important phrase of all. Love knows it. Now that's crazy, is it not? What we've been seeing and saying is that Augustine can't rationally comprehend what's happened to him. But love knows it. He's saying that his connection with God, is he saying that it's irrational? No. He's saying that it's super rational, or it's hyper rational. He's not saying that it's irrational, right? I mean, maybe some of you have heard of Soren Kierkegaard, who talks about a blind leap of faith. I don't have time to talk about Kierkegaard right now, but many people think that he's saying that faith is fundamentally irrational. Augustine is not saying that this encounter with light is irrational, but he is saying that his reason is too puny to deal with it. And that's also the same thing as saying that language fails. By the way, another good reason to do negative theology or apophatic theology in the manner of Parmenides / Aristotle, because when you say that God is not this or that or this or that, are you claiming to know God? No. Are you claiming to have, and I'm talking to you, Mirka, are you claiming to have a dictionary definition from a philosophically airtight dictionary about God? No. Are you claiming to know God's essence? No. You're just saying God is not this, God is not that, God is not this, God is not that. Negations are a way of talking about God that don't befuddle your reason. Negations are a way of talking about God that do justice to the fact that our finite minds cannot comprehend God, that they cannot comprehend the infinite God. Okay, so our reason cannot know it, but what can know it? Anyone know? Love, right? He says love knows it. I want to say a couple of things about this. Love knows it. Y'all, you haven't read a ton of Aristotle. You've only read like one section. But does that sound like something Aristotle would say? It does not. Now, Aristotle does talk about love in books like the Nicomachean Ethics, but he talks about them in that third person way of abstract reason, right? That's not what Augustine's doing here. Augustine, first off, he's praying to God. He's pouring his heart out to God. And he's saying, where my reason is like a babbling, bumbling idiot, but love gets the job done. Love is adequate to the task of somehow connecting to God. And so I have 2 points. One is that Aristotle would not talk this way. Two, though, is, and this might be the last, I don't think this is the last thing I'm going to say, but I am running out of time. What I'm about to say is super important as we go forward into Aquinas and Bonaventure, okay? Do y'all know how I've talked about the different writing styles between Aristotle on the one hand and Plato on the other? Do you remember that? So Aristotle's more systematic, Plato's more of a narrative. And I think that at a very basic level, you could say that the Confessions are more like which of those two?
Like Plato's.
That's right, because it's a narrative. Now, yeah, yes, that's right. Now, does that mean that Plato is stupider than Aristotle? Hell no. It just means that his project is different. Now, in the same way that you have these two different approaches, you've got Aristotle's approach, his writing style, his genre, and you have Plato's writing style or genre. In the same way, what we're going to see when we get to Thomas, when I say Thomas, I mean Aquinas, okay? Thomas is Thomas Aquinas. When we get to Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure, we're going to see that they have radically different writing styles. Thomas's is more like Aristotle's because it's more systematic. Now, side note, even Thomas Aquinas wrote hymns, Hymns, songs. Are hymns poetry? Yes, they are. So am I throwing Thomas Aquinas under the bus and saying that he was just a logic machine? No, I'm not. But he comes way closer to being a logic machine than Bonaventure does. Thomas Aquinas is incredibly systematic. Like Aristotle, Bonaventure is more like Augustine in the specific sense that his writing style is, I'm going to say, more devotional. He's more willing to talk about love. Augustine's talking about love here. We just said that Aristotle would never do that, but Augustine's doing it. Bonaventure goes there. Aristotle would not go there. Bonaventure does go there. An interesting question would be, does Thomas go there? And I want to say maybe a little bit, but not very much. Now, I want to show you something real quick. because y'all, what I'm doing right now is I'm using Augustine as a preview to later medieval thinkers. And by the way, like you should be like, you'll thank me later. Like, I wish someone would have done this for me. One of the things that I want to do in this class is to use I want to show you how Augustine's the first medieval thinker. And this is a huge way in which that's true. This book, which is not even on your syllabus, even as a recommended book, The Love of Learning and the Desire for God by Jean Leclerc, a study in monastic culture. He says that there's basically two kinds of medieval theology. There's scholastic theology and monastic theology. Scholastic theology and monastic theology. Now, we're going to talk more about scholastic theology later. Scholastic theology pops into existence with the rediscovery of whom?
Aristotle.
Aristotle. There is no scholastic philosophy before Aristotle, basically. But after Aristotle, there's this new thing called scholastic theology. It's basically like, you know what? It's basically like this, talking about the Bible, the Trinity, and the incarnation in the same way that Aristotle talks. Like, that's kind of what it is. So scholastic theology pops into existence with the rediscovery of Aristotle, but there continues to be this other mode of writing, which Leclerc calls monastic theology, which is much more devotional. It's much more, it's more holistic. It has to do with the affects and your affections. I'm going to write that word in the chat, and I have about 2 minutes. See that? Affections. What are affections? Affections is kind of like a pre-modern way of talking about emotion. And what I'm trying to say to you is that monastic writing, the monastic writing style, is much more affective. It's more likely to make you cry. It's more likely to make you laugh. It's more likely to make you feel joy or sorrow, okay? As opposed to scholastic theology, which is very systematic, okay? Is one better than the other? I don't think so. I think that they're both awesome. There's a time and a place for everything. But you see some of this beginning with Augustine, okay? Now, so what he says is reason cannot grasp your light, O God, but love can. Reason does not know it. Even nous, mind. I've been talking about how awesome mind is, how it grasps the whole, and how it's this epiphany. It's amazing, but even it cannot rise to the level of this light. Our minds cannot know it. Love knows it. That's amazing. Aristotle would never say that. I'm going to keep reading. We're going to finish this paragraph and then we'll stop, okay? Eternal truth and true love and beloved eternity, you are my God. To you I sigh day and night. Do you think Aristotle would talk about sighing and especially he being the one who is sighing? No, he would not. To you I sigh day and night. When I first came to know you, you raised me up to make me see that what I saw is what? Anyone see that? Being. I'm near the bottom of page 123 in the section 1016. When I first came to know you, you raised me up to make me see that what I saw is being. Y'all, that is Parmenides. That is exactly like he is talking about Parmenidean being, which is also Aristotle's God. Okay? To you I sigh day and night. And you gave me a shock to the weakness of my sight by the strong radiance of your eyes. He's looking at God and he's saying, you are too overwhelming for me. I cannot handle you. I'm too weak. I'm too finite. And I trembled with love and awe. And I found myself far from you in the region of dissimilarity. Now, I'm not going to finish the paragraph because I have to talk about this phrase, the region of dissimilarity, which is on your notes. Y'all, do you remember when we were talking about Heraclitus? He talks about the blooming, buzzing confusion and how everything is constantly flux. Parmenides comes along and he says, fuck all that, right? He says that cannot be real. All of that is non-being, whack a non-being. And Parmenides says, let me tell you what cannot be being, what cannot be real. And what does he say? One of the things he says is multiplicity, right? Multiplicity or diversity, that my iPhone is not the cup. Two things. Remember, this is all review. Parmenides says that the moment you have two things, that implies non-being. Why? Because the iPhone is not the cup. That's non-being, according to Parmenides. Well, what does Augustine say? He said, I found myself far from you and in the region of what? Dissimilarity. He's talking about diversity. He's talking about multiplicity. What is dissimilarity? Dissimilarity, that's a weird phrase, but he's saying that down here in the world, we are estranged from being. We are estranged from being. Augustine is basically saying Parmenides was right. That which is real cannot include multiplicity, but holy shit, I am in a world of multiplicity. Look, I have 5 fingers, different parts of my body. I'm surrounded by multiplicity. I'm surrounded by non-being. I'm trapped in the region of dissimilarity. That's at the bottom of page 123. He's saying, I'm trapped in the realm of Heraclitus. I'm trapped in the blooming, buzzing confusion. Now, I want to close like this very, very briefly, and then this will end. This will end my lecture on book 7. Look with me at the very last line on my notes here. Augustine says, I'm fucked because I'm in the region of dissimilarity, and you are being. And by being, he means Parmenidean being. He says, I'm fucked because I'm in the blooming, buzzing confusion. Now, what's the solution? And I want to close like this. We talked a little bit about it last class, but the solution here on your screen highlighted is the humility of God. Okay? What Augustine thinks is that Parmenidean being came down and entered into our blooming, buzzing confusion. That's what he thinks. And because of that, God is in the blooming, buzzing confusion. And because of that, it's not simply a blooming, buzzing confusion. It's where God is. God became a man. God became a baby. We call this the incarnation. And what Augustine says is basically this. I learned so much from the books of the Neoplatonists, but I didn't learn that. I did not learn about the humility of God from the books of the Platonists. No, no, no. I did not learn about God. I did not learn from the books of the Platonists that God, the divine Logos, became a little baby. But, he says, I learned it from the scriptures. I learned it from the Catholic faith. I learned it from Saint Ambrose of Milan, who is mentioned in book 7 of the Confessions. Now, y'all, I hope that you're hanging with me. Mark my words, like this is a super important chapter, a super important book for understanding medieval philosophy. So if you don't quite get it, I encourage you to watch the YouTube video again. Does anyone have any comments, questions, jokes, or riddles at the moment? I hope that I'm making sense. A lot of stuff here. It probably feels like a fire hydrant. You know, I preach every Sunday, and sometimes my wife gets mad at me because she thinks I repeat myself too much. I repeat myself because it makes it easier for you to understand. So hopefully with repetition, you'll get some stuff. Does anyone have any questions right now? On a scale from 1 to 10, how am I making sense? Maybe an 8, a 7?
Like a 9.
Awesome. Now, Max/Charles, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Mirka, any thoughts, questions, comments at the moment?
Not at all.
Okay, well, I'm grateful for you guys. Have a wonderful weekend. On Monday, I'm going to take 20 minutes and just go over the paper. Everything you need to know is in the syllabus and in that special supplement that I wrote, the guide. But, you know, I'm still going to go over it with you to give you a chance to ask any questions and stuff like that. Okay? Peace. Y'all have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Monday.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.